And I usually welcome to this EAC Zoom interview. My name is Donald Palmer. I'm a commissioner at the Election Assistance Commission. This Zoom interview is one of a series of interviews on considerations for CARES Act funding use in elections in this COVID environment. I'd like to welcome my guests, Kathy Boockvar, Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and Secretary Michael Adams, Secretary of the State of Kentucky. I want to thank you for taking your time to talk about the important challenges we face with COVID-19 and how the election funding may assist you. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce you to our guests and look at your backgrounds. I'll first start with Secretary Adams. Secretary Adams is a native of Paducah, Kentucky, and he serves as Kentucky's 77th Secretary of State. He attended public schools and was the first in his family to get a bachelor's degree. And after graduating from the University of Louisville, in its third class of McConnell Scholars, Michael attended Harvard Law School on low-income aid. Now, returning to Kentucky, Michael clerked for Chief U.S. District Judge John Hayburn for Senator McConnell's 2002 re-election campaign and as Deputy General Counsel to Governor Ernie Fletcher before moving to Washington to serve as counsel to the U.S. Deputy Attorney General in the second Bush administration. So in 2007, Michael began full-time private practice in election law, first as a general counsel to the Republican Governors Association and later opening a national practice in the field. Our next guest is Kathy Boockvar, Secretary of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. She has served as Secretary of the Commonwealth since January of 2019. And in this role, Boockvar leads the Pennsylvania Department of State. In August of 2019, Boockvar was appointed to serve as the Elections Committee co-chair for the National Association of Secretaries of State, or NAS. Ms. Boockvar is an attorney graduating from American University Washington College of Law with an extensive background in public interest law and policy, election administration, and nonprofit healthcare administration. She's worked in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Most recently, she served as a senior advisor to the governor on election and modernization, leading and managing initiatives to improve the security and technology in Pennsylvania's elections and voting systems, in collaboration with federal, state, and county officials. Well, I want to thank you both for agreeing to this interview. As you know, the CARES Act was passed in response to COVID-19, and so there's going to be a lot of opportunities, also challenges in the next couple months as we proceed toward our primaries and general election. So the first question I'd like to ask you all is, how did you and your staff members begin planning for your state's response to the coronavirus pandemic? I'll let you start. Go ahead, start, Secretary Adams.
Okay, sure. So to put this into context, I was on public television on Monday, March 9th for an hour-long interview about election law and policy. I just got sworn in 2 months prior to that. And in an hour, I didn't get a single question about coronavirus. Just 1 week later, on March 16th, under the emergency powers of our state's laws, the governor and I jointly agreed to and implemented a delay of 5 weeks, the maximum permitted delay of our primary election from May 19th to June 23rd. That's how much things changed in just a week with COVID-19 and the responsiveness of officials. In that span of time, I spent most of my time nonstop on the phone with the frontline election workers in Kentucky, our county clerks. We have 120 counties. The county clerks are the chief election officials of their counties. So I called a number of them. I spoke a lot with our State Board of Elections members and staff, obviously with the governor and his staff. And so we responded quickly. The first thing we had to figure out was, do we know what to do? And if not, can we figure it out if we have more time? We delayed the election by 5 weeks. First, just out of hope that the pandemic might pass. This was pretty early in the process when you didn't have closure of public sites and so forth yet. And the thought was, well, maybe this thing will blow over by June, so let's just move the election. But also the thought was, well, maybe this won't blow over. We need time to essentially reinvent our election system. That's one of the biggest challenges that we have in Kentucky, is that Actually, I'm sure Secretary Boockvar can speak to this as well. In our state, historically, we're not a vote by mail state. On average, in our elections, 2% of our voters vote by mail and the rest vote in person on election day. And so it's a big pivot to make in such a short time. So for us, it wasn't just a matter of kicking the can and trying to prepare logistically. It was a matter of having the ability to respond comprehensively, including potentially having to redesign and adopt a much different election system, which is what we ended up doing.
Secretary Boockvar?
Thanks so much for having us on the show, on your program, by the way. I think similar to Secretary Adams, that first week was a shocking transformation. So I was, very thankful to Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania and Secretary Rachel Levine, who's our Secretary of Health, who from the moment we had our first 2 cases in Pennsylvania, immediately embarked on a very transparent, sort of public information focused approach, which then we continue to support and carry out in the Department of State. So I'm a appointed Secretary of State. So I'm part of the governor's cabinet, which in this circumstance was, I think, incredibly helpful because we were very much part of the team planning forward and having regular, multi times a week conversations with the other members of the cabinet, understanding sort of the, this is a very intersected problem, right? You've got your issues with unemployment and, revenue and Department of Health and Department of Education. And of course, all of this impacts voting and elections because, for example, the, school systems, once those were closed down, that impacted polling places, which schools are often used for in Pennsylvania and so forth. So it was a very integrated effort in Pennsylvania, which I was incredibly thankful for. And in the Department of State, I have to say that I'm so impressed and inspired by our staff who, the Capitol, basically the governor started shutting down regionally. So the places that were most hit by the virus earlier on started a stay-at-home order. But in Harrisburg, where the Capitol complex is located, that was a couple weeks in, was when that was shut down. And it was basically sort of a middle of the night decision. And it was one of those times that I was incredibly grateful for the fact that my chief counsel answered my call at 3:45 in the morning because we had to make decisions immediately about how to continue to run our operations, not to mention then reaching out to the 67 counties who obviously on the elections front run elections with us. So I think collaboration has been, collaboration and dedication, like commitment that I've just never seen anything like it before in my life, has made this process much easier.
Well, it's been a dramatic period of time. What sort of, the next question I have is sort of about what has sort of been the response of your local election officials and how have you worked with them to assess their greatest needs in your states? What have their concerns been?
You want to go first again, Secretary Adams? Might as well.
Sure. So back in mid-March, the biggest concern was, will we have enough Lysol? Will we have enough Windex? Will we have enough wipes for all of our polling locations? We thought that was going to be a bit difficult, but man, those were good problems to have at the time. We thought that would be sufficient. Obviously, the needs, the perceived needs of our folks on the ground changed radically as the facts developed. So that was what they really wanted first. Over time, it became obvious to us that their needs were a lot greater than that. Our deadline in our statute for all of the poll workers to be selected was March 20th. Well, 4 days after we're delaying the election, suffice it to say, we don't have the 16,000 poll workers that we need for our nearly 4,000 precincts in Kentucky to run an election. The governor and I extended that deadline by our agreement, but still, not a lot of folks were raising their hands to put in a 12-hour shift for $100 on election day. So that was certainly an issue. Also, another issue was we just didn't have the polling locations to have a traditional in-person election. To Secretary Boockvar's point, a lot of our locations are places that are now closed. Nursing homes are actually a popular location for voting in Kentucky under our law and our precedent. And so to the degree we're looking at things like curbside voting, drive-through voting, not every place can handle that. A lot of our voting locations are designed for a certain type of voting that we're not simply able to do now, given our need to limit direct contact between poll workers and voters, and for that matter, between voters and other voters. And so we'll get more into the substance in a minute about what Kentucky's doing, but to us, it was pretty obvious pretty fast that we had to come up with a way to ensure both public safety, of course, but also ensure that Mother Nature didn't disenfranchise anybody. So for us, that was reducing polling locations significantly. It was redoing what Election Day looks like, and ultimately it was expanding absentee voting. Something similar I think about Pennsylvania and Kentucky is both states are states with a pretty rich history of in-person voting with fairly limited absentee voting. But both legislatures were responsive to the crisis that we're facing. We recognized things had to change at the legislative level. I agree with certainly the Republican secretaries of state, and I think a number of Democratic secretaries of state, that we don't Washington to set the election laws for us. We want to run our own elections. We believe in federalism. But that begs the question to what's the state solution? What are you going to do to fix this? And both of our states acted legislatively. Pennsylvania, of course, passed their own law to expand absentee voting and make the system much easier. In Kentucky, because we don't have a full-time legislature, ours had to adjourn by April 15th, which was a pretty quick turnaround, especially with our legislature aborting a lot of their session to get out of town fast, given their own concern about their own safety and infecting others. So given the brief time they had to resolve the issue, what they did is extend the emergency powers of me and the governor to make changes by executive order, essentially, to the manner of the election. And then what the governor and I agreed to just on Friday, actually, is a very detailed plan that permits much expanded, but also easily facilitated absentee voting in addition to the other changes.
Secretary Boockvar, what have your local election officials been telling you, and what has sort of been that coordination between you and your locals on preparing?
Yeah, thanks. So, and I'll just say our primary was supposed to be yesterday. So it was scheduled for April 28th, which, as it turns out, would have really been at the heart of, I mean, we've started to emerge, started to look forward and reopen, but pretty much at the heart of the surge. So it was clearly, even 6 weeks ago, the first, and we worked very, very closely with the 67 counties in Pennsylvania. And so they were, very early on, we and they agreed that we should postpone the election. A huge, overwhelming majority of counties wanted to postpone the election. That was their primary first wish. And then, of course, on top of that, to encourage vote by mail and to allow for consolidation of polling places and to make it easier for them to find poll workers, since so many poll workers were saying that they did not want to do it this year, even with the delay. So thank goodness. So to start, last fall, the legislature and the administration have worked together to pass a law called Act 77 in Pennsylvania, which had more change, good sort of voter access change than had happened in 8 decades in Pennsylvania. And one of the things that it provided, of course, long before any of us knew about COVID, was vote by mail for any reason or no reason at all. So this was going to be the first primary where that was taking effect. And so the counties were already working very closely with us on just managing the increase in volume expected under normal circumstances of vote by mail. And that was one of their biggest concerns, is even in a non-pandemic situation, how do we manage that volume? Well, then, of course, COVID-19, once it happened, it made clear that all those concerns were exacerbated. So we're very thankful for the extra funds from the federal government to help, to allow them to increase their staff and increase their equipment and increase every way, shape, and form the ability for them to manage that extra volume. And I'm happy to say that as of this morning, we had, I think, well over 800,000 applications for mail-in and absentee ballots. And just to give you context, and we still have 4 weeks to go before our deadline. And the most Pennsylvanians that have ever voted absentee in a primary, even in a presidential primary, has been about 100,000. So we're already 8 times that, and we still have 4 weeks to go. So it's really remarkable how much, and the counties are just really working hard to figure out how to get the resources they need in conjunction with us.
Wow. So the next question I have is, how are you planning to use your CARES Act? You mentioned a little bit of that, Secretary Boockvar. How do you plan to use that funding to prepare for what you noted would be an increase in absentee or mail voting, and to sort of make the in-person voting experience as safe as possible?
You want to switch it up? You want me to keep talking?
Sure, go
By
ahead.
all means.
Okay. We are so Pennsylvania will be receiving about $14 million from the CARES Act funds. Thank you, the federal government. We're going to subgrant of those 14 million. We're going to subgrant 6 million of it to the counties directly for them to be able to decide on their own what their greatest needs are, whether it's staffing, equipment, vote by mail expansion, supplies, all the above. And then at the state level, we procured, we bought precinct protection kits with masks, hand sanitizers, and so forth, masking tape for the counties so that they don't have to purchase that. And we are implementing accessible ballot marking device option for mail-in voting for voters with disabilities. We also embarked on a very comprehensive voter education campaign. So we basically ended up tripling, or maybe even more, the voter education campaign we had been planning before COVID, just to educate voters about the options under that legislation I mentioned from the fall. Now we had to tell them about the change in the primary date and really urge vote by mail. So we sent postcards to every primary household in the state. We are doing bilingual TV, radio, digital ads. So I actually was just recording my portion of the Spanish ad yesterday. Don't judge me. Hopefully I did okay. But it's really, it's really paying off just based on the numbers of people who are already applying to vote by mail. So really hitting every front to encourage as much as possible by mail, but make sure that for those that are going to vote in person, that it's as safe and comfortable as possible.
Secretary Adams.
So Kentucky, our approach is very similar to what Pennsylvania is doing. The governor and I just reached our agreement late last week. The State Board of Elections is meeting probably Friday to ratify that and issue specific regulations. And so we haven't made all the final math decisions about how we're going to allocate, but I'll tell you what we intend to do. Chiefly, first of all, we intend to do, as Pennsylvania and some other states have done, send a postcard to every single voter registered in our state to notify them of the changes that we're making. We're going to direct them all to a secure online portal where they can register to vote absentee. And so we don't have the county clerk's offices, many of which are closed or have very limited hours right now, deluged by phone calls and emails and faxes. That's going to happen anyway. But to handle this overload, we're going to have a web portal. So that's part of it. Also, the postcard will let people know that if they need to vote in person, we recommend they make an appointment before they do so. We expanded early voting. We actually don't have early voting for the most part in Kentucky. It's discretionary. It's not set by statute. Counties can pick their own process for that. So we have a universal standard now of early voting starting 15 days before, and we include Saturdays unless it's not feasible for a county. We want to try to take the pressure off of the poll workers and the voting locations on election day. not just through vote by mail, which I think will be the vast majority of the ballots, but also by having more early voting so we can space out the people who need to vote in person or insist on voting in person. Our state constitution is explicit about requiring elections to be held, quote, at the polls. I wasn't comfortable eliminating election day. Even vote by mail advocates caution you to not go too far too fast, and even vote by mail states have some in-person voting. I think you need that to be compliant with the ADA and so forth. So we're doing a hybrid system, but we're certainly pressing people to vote by mail if they can. So we're going to use the funds for that portal. We're going to use the funds for the postcard. We're going to use the funds for PPE. We're still going to need that. No matter how many adjustments we make for what election day looks like and how we space people out, we still need that, obviously. We're buying new equipment. We're buying new scanners. Our state is mostly DREs. We've got some counties, all of our counties get to decide what kind of election equipment they have. I live in Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky. We vote on paper that gets scanned into machines, but we're one of the outliers. Especially our poorer, more rural counties tend to have outdated equipment from a long time ago, DREs. The biggest thing I saw in the 2 years I spent campaigning across my state, I saw it from Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Libertarians, everybody, is everybody wants to move away from electronic machines and toward paper balloting. Everyone feels more secure about that. So one silver lining, if you want to call it that, of all of this is fortunately this stimulus funding is enabling Kentucky to move light years ahead on transitioning away from the DREs and more toward paper balloting systems, which I think increases public confidence, not just now, but afterward.
Very pleased that the CARES Act is helping your states, particularly with this pandemic. The next question I have is, what would you say, as you've had a chance to prepare for the primary and you're looking toward November, what is the biggest obstacle you're going to have? Will it be just the increased absentee or mail voting? And are you, you did note a little bit of this, are you planning changes on the polling locations and absentee voting with CARES Act? I think Secretary Adams, you mentioned that you may be consolidating polling places. So we'll start with you on this one. What do you think is the biggest obstacle and what changes are you planning?
Sure. Certainly a big obstacle is just we've never done this before. This is 3 months into my first term and my first election, and quite a learning experience. So certainly it's a challenge for all of us to adapt to a much different system. Our clerks aren't experienced in this. I'm not. None of us are. I'll tell you what the biggest challenge I have is, I'll be very blunt about it. It's the stigma, especially among Republicans and conservatives, about mailing in ballots. Our state, as I said, 2% of voters historically vote by mail. We're a state where people historically show up and vote in person. And there's a very lively debate out there about vote by mail and whether it's secure and so forth. President Trump himself votes absentee. That's all we're calling for, is people to vote absentee. That's different from mailing out ballots to everybody in the voter file. That may work well on the West Coast where the rolls are in compliance. Unfortunately, in Kentucky, I inherited voter rolls that were a decade out of compliance, and I got a consent decree from a federal judge telling us that. So we're working on getting our voter rolls cleaned up. We're just not at a point where we can mail ballots out to people automatically. So that's why our compromise position was expanded absentee. That requires the voter to provide some sort of verifying information, date of birth or so forth, or signature before we mail a ballot to that address. But the biggest issue I have right now is trying to destigmatize voting by mail. I can tell you on my end, it's a big political challenge. I saw a lot of county Republican Party chairmen on Facebook trashing what we're doing, and you got to get everybody together and explain how this is good for everybody. Otherwise, you're going to have people either crowding the polling sites and making it not feasible to have a safe election on election day, or they're going to stay away and not vote. And either of those would be tragic.
So, Secretary Boockvar, I want you to answer that question as well. But also, do you have an online absentee ballot request portal?
Yes. So, yeah, go ahead. Do you want to?
Well, I think it's very vital. I think that with the transmittal with the Postal Service, it could take 5 to 7 days. And with the processing that has to take place at the county level, there needs to be some efficiencies with this process. And that's my biggest concern heading into November is with the avalanche. It won't just be an increase, it'll be an avalanche if we're still in the same situation, is how do we make this an efficient process? For a lot of states, it's just simply non-efficient when it's a very paper-driven process. And so I'll hand it over to you, Secretary Boockvar. What are your challenges and how do you intend to sort of overcome those?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for all of us at the county level, the state level, at national level is finding that right balance between public health and access to democracy. I think I get, what I find frustrating are, I think Secretary Adams alluded to this some, like, there's not one size fits all solution that's perfect. In fact, none of the solutions in a global pandemic are good solutions, right? We are trying to make the best of a bad situation. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And I think one of the challenges are, like with many other issues, there are folks who think there's only one way and they know what the one way is. And I've really been trying to encourage people to not assume it has to be one way or another way. That what we want to do is encourage vote by mail and absentee voting as much as humanly possible, while also recognizing that there are people with disabilities who literally can't vote by mail. So we need to provide other options. There are other people who, for any number of reasons, will not be able to vote by mail or will not hear about voting by mail. So we need to provide safe, secure options for them as well. And it's not one or the other, it's really finding the best of both. So that's really what we've been trying to focus on. And you asked about the online application, and that's been huge. So last year, before Act 77 passed, before we had mail-in voting for everybody, we had already implemented for the first time before the November election, online application for absentee voting when it was sort of traditional absentee voting. And so the good news was when Act 77 passed, again, before COVID existed, or at least before any of us were aware of it, we already had the portal, the online application. We just had to expand it to allow for the expanded vote by mail opportunities for people. But that was much easier than starting from scratch. So 75% of our voters are applying online, which not only makes it easier for the counties, particularly during this time when we've been at stay-at-homes, but also reduce errors, right? You don't have the transcription errors of somebody trying to recopy. And it's easier for the voter. They could do it, at midnight, sitting in their bed, and make sure that their information is correct and accurate, that they put in the address that they want their ballot mailed to, and all those things. So it has been a huge lifesaver at every level, which has been great.
Well, particularly in Pennsylvania, particularly with
I think you froze.
Did you lose me?
Speechless. You were just speechless.
Oh. Well, what I was saying is, it's interesting you're talking about the online portal. Particularly, wasn't this Pennsylvania's first election with no excuse absentee, which in of itself was going to cause and have a large number of folks using that. But now it's even more it's going to be basically an avalanche of requests.
Yeah.
So it's a very unique situation that you're in. The last question.
If I may, just one more thing. Though that's absolutely true, and it's amazing having the online, we also realized it was critical for people who might not have internet access or who just didn't understand, older voters who might not be as comfortable, that they have a number to call. So we have a 1-877, toll-free number and we put that on all our postcards and on our TV ads and everywhere, which has also meant that those are answered by the Department of State. So we've had literally thousands and thousands of calls every day with people saying, can you please mail me a ballot? which is a good problem to have, but we had to find call center employees to come help because we literally have more calls coming in every day than on election day, which is really telling you how remarkable the transition has been.
Wow.
Hey, Commissioner, before you go to the fifth question, I'd like to just chime in for a minute if I could. I want to, obviously, we've both spoken about local officials and our relationships there. I also want to commend DHS. I want to commend EAC. I want to commend NAS and my colleagues of both parties who are secretaries of state. We've also relied on each other a great deal with through regular calls and information sharing. Thank God Pennsylvania and Kentucky get to go after Ohio and Wisconsin and the other states that have already gone. We've learned lessons from how they've handled all of this, not just lessons about the logistics of how to run an election, but I'll tell you what I think the biggest threat to our elections is today. It's not foreign, it's domestic. It's not a foreign nation state. It's us. It's us if we don't put partisanship aside and brinksmanship aside and come up with a solution. You saw, I won't pick on anybody, but in some states you saw the legislature and the governor go at it in court. You saw the governor and the secretary go up against the courts. And the unfortunate thing about that is people don't know the rules of the game until it may be too late to get their votes counted. They think election day is on, then it's off. So what you saw in other states, fortunately, who were able to learn from states that went before us is basically how to avoid that. That's why it was important for me to work with the governor of the other political party to reach an agreement well in advance of our election and provide clarity to our voters.
Thank you. Yeah. So the last question I have, a formal question, we can talk a little bit more, but are there any other initiatives or plans that you've developed? Because it wasn't too long ago. In fact, it was early 2020. It seems like a long time ago. That the previous round of HAVA security funds were provided to the states. Could you talk a little bit about how are you using those funds and how it might help with 2020 in November of 2020?
Yeah. You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
Have at it.
All right. So similar to the CARES Act funds, we really wanted to give a good chunk of the funds directly as subgrants to the counties so that they could identify within the terms of the coverage, obviously, the highest priorities for them. So Pennsylvania is fortunate to be receiving about $15 million from the federal government on the election security grant. We're providing $7 million of that directly to the counties. So a total of $13 million statewide to the counties with both grants. And those funds can be used by the counties directly on DDoS or ransomware. They could use it on expansion of vote by mail and the technology needs of that, staffing needs of that, expansion of services. They could use it on all kinds of technologies, physical security of their voting systems, of their ballots. And then at the state level, the 8 million or so remaining, we're using on cybersecurity. We're providing cybersecurity upgrades for all the counties. We're providing for post-election audits statewide so that the counties don't have any costs relating to that because we've been rolling out pilots of that over the last year. We're providing various different cyber and technology upgrades to the counties, again, at no cost to them, and miscellaneous other technology upgrades, including we're going to be replacing our entire voter registration system to the next level of technology and security. So lots of great things. Thankfully, the 2018 federal dollars, we gave 100% of that to the counties to upgrade their voting systems to voter verifiable paper ballot systems. And so all 67 counties have completed that, thank goodness, and those 2018 dollars went to very good use there. So we were able to take the 2020 dollars and use it for a wide range of other purposes.
Well, that's very encouraging. Secretary Adams.
We're essentially doing word for word the same thing in Kentucky. As I said a moment ago, we've got a lot of our counties, especially our more poor and rural counties, that have outdated, functionally obsolete equipment. That's something that, regardless of party, people want to see improved, is having up-to-date equipment. And whether, so just to put this into a little bit of political context, we had a very, very close election for governor. Last year, our Republican incumbent was defeated by about 1/3 of a percentage point. And there were allegations that our electronic machines were either intentionally misprogrammed or just not working right. And we're not counting the top of the ticket along with the rest of the ticket. The rest of our party's ticket won comfortably, and the governor didn't. So the concern about electronic machines is, at least in Kentucky, very much bipartisan. I think a lot of people who are left-leaning are worried about hacking and are concerned about Russia in light of the findings from Congress about the 2016 election. And at least in Kentucky, a lot of people on the right are concerned too. So it's really a bipartisan thing. So we're ecstatic to have these funds, and we're doing the same things with them that Pennsylvania is doing. I'll throw out something. We're not ready to make a formal announcement yet, but we're pretty close. We've actually also worked with FEMA. FEMA has certain funds that are allocable toward improving election equipment under unique circumstances, but very good workable ones. So cybersecurity is an issue that FEMA actually has some relationship with, and they are able to work with DHS and with state governments to provide grants for improving cybersecurity in one respect. For example, in Kentucky, our voter file is accessible not just by the Secretary of State and the State Board of Elections, but by every single county clerk. And a lot of our county clerks don't have the security that I think they should have. And so we're able to get funds to help them improve their security on the front end. Our system is only as secure as its weakest link. And so a lot of our county clerks just simply don't have the sort of advanced training that we'd like for them to have. And so we've got technology coming soon to help improve that step of the process. So there are fortunately lots of grants out there that we're being able to be creative with and improve this across the board. But it's funny, Secretary Boockvar and I were at NAS just less than 3 months ago, and it was all cybersecurity for 4 days. And this shows you how much things can change on a dime in election management.
Well, I think it's really important that that took place. I mean, it's interesting. We're probably more vulnerable now than we ever were, particularly with the pandemic. So it's good that the states and localities have sort of had the opportunity to prepare over the last couple of years for where we are today, at least so we can focus on this pandemic and be rest assured that our security is being taken care of at the state and local level. Before we wrap this up, I'll just leave it to each of you. Is there anything, be it voter confidence or generally how you view the next couple months going, the next 180 days, I guess, before Election Day? I'll leave it to you with the final words, and then we'll wrap this up. I'll let you go first, Secretary Boockvar.
It's a tough time. I think, I guess my closing words are to circle back to where I started, which is to talk about the collaboration. And I was talking about it initially within state and counties and how key those conversations and keeping in touch about priorities and figuring out what the biggest hurdles are and how to fill those gaps. But I agree very much with Secretary Adams that this is much bigger picture of collaboration, and the federal partnerships like your own at the EAC and the DHS and NAS have been phenomenal. And like the NAS Elections Committee has been meeting every week for the last, what's it been? It's been over a month, right, Secretary Adams?
Yes.
Which I don't know that that's ever happened before, but I have to say it's not been we're meeting every week because it's been of value, and we only meet so long as we need to. So it's an efficient conversation, and of course it's remote, but really the states sharing with each other their successes, their challenges, where they're finding, the precinct protection kits that we ordered, I found out about that vendor from one of those weekly NAS calls, and literally that day we called that vendor to say we need 6,000, as many kits as you possibly can get us by June 2nd, and we were able to get thousands and thousands of them. So I want to thank Secretary Adams, all of my colleagues across the country, and the entire federal, state, and local partnerships who, again, the commitment and the dedication have just been off the charts. And I sometimes feel like they forget to take care of themselves as well as take care of others. So I want to say to the voters, you are in such good hands, because the people running our elections and democracy in this country are just, salt of the earth is not an expression I use very often, but really incredibly dedicated, smart, creative, thinking outside the box, and most importantly, trying to find that balance to protect public health while ensuring that we all have access to voting. So I want to thank them primarily.
Yeah, I'll second everything that Secretary Boockvar has said. Certainly, we've learned from what other states have done and things that haven't gone so well, but we've learned a lot from where things have gone well, and my colleagues of both parties have been really helpful in offering advice publicly and privately, what they've learned. As I say, Kentucky and Pennsylvania, I think, are a little fortunate to get to go later after everybody else. We don't necessarily know more than anyone else does. We just have the good fortune to come after the other states and learn from what works and what doesn't. I'm very comforted that I don't see a single colleague in this position of either party anywhere in the country who's seen as a hack or trying to favor one party over the other. All of us have followed our constitutional oaths. All of us understand that our job is to improve public confidence in our elections. And so to the degree that we can be statesmanlike and work above politics, my biggest fear really isn't that we're going to have, because of our elections, a spike in coronavirus. I really think that all of our states have been great about protecting our people. My biggest concern is that the election will be brought into question by people who think they're being cheated in some way. And so it's so incumbent, even in normal times, but especially now. We've got such competitive elections this year. We've got a competitive race for the highest office in the land and other races. And so it's so important for all of us to work in a bipartisan and neutral fashion and be seen doing so, working with people across party lines, so the public will accept these results. The public are concerned about cybersecurity. They're concerned about the rules changing, and they're right to. We have to change the rules just as part of reality. But they have a lot of concerns, and it's our job now as a public component to explain what we're doing and why we're doing it, and that we have little alternative.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you, and we at the AC greatly appreciate you doing this and the partnerships that we've made with the National Association of Secretaries of States and yourselves. With that, thank you for participating in this call, and good luck to you and your voters in the 2020 election cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Good to see you.
You too.